couple of days, if I'm not mistaken, on the issue of integration in this overall geopolitical and economic landscape. So I chose, with your indulgence, if I may say so, to make a few comments on the state of play, if I may say so, of regional integration. Although I know that tomorrow my colleague Mohammed Razaz, who is the expert on the subject matter, will give you a presentation on what we're doing when it comes to this very important subject. We have in front of us our dear friend Mr. Kondi from the OECD, and I can't but mention the collaboration we have with the German cooperation agency, GIZ, and the OECD in producing what I think was a groundbreaking report on the state of play of regional integration in 2021, which we are all familiar with. And this report, I have here some numbers, maybe I won't go through them, but they're showing very clearly two things. Yes, regional integration has improved, but very modestly in the last 10 to 15 years in the region. As is it written somewhere, we are really punching below our weight when it comes to regional integration. And to be more dramatic, we are one of the least integrated region in the world. Although regional integration has been steadily improving in the last 10 to 15 years, but the baseline where we started from is so low that where we are today is extremely lower than where we should be in terms of regional integration. Without going through all the numbers that Reem has put in this few beautifully drafted pages that she prepared for me for today. So our potential in the region is definitely much more important than the reality of our regional integration. And if we add to that the huge opportunity that exists beyond the Euro-Mediterranean region, here I'm talking about the African dimension, especially after the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which just entered into force. We're talking about 1.3 billion person with a 3.4 trillion dollars, not euro, in terms of GDP. But to add to this, because we always look at Africa in terms of coup d'etat, in terms of political instability, but Africa happens to be the fastest growing continent in today's world. So if we group this Euro-Mediterranean region and Africa, I think what we could achieve together, if the right policies and the right approach is taken when it comes to regional integration, are limitless. And this does not only apply to Africa and the southern Mediterranean, it applies to Europe, because we are living in a world where economic bloc and the polarization of the world politics and economy is accelerating. Well, in the last 6 months, we're hearing about, well, we've been hearing about the Silk Road project of China for the last 2 or 3 years, and suddenly we are hearing about this magnificent infrastructure project that will lay the ground for this corridor spanning from India all the way to Europe through Saudi Arabia, Israel, and so many other countries. These are all attempts by one bloc or the other, or part of one bloc or the other, to enhance their own capacity to access market and their regional and their integration into the world economy better than the others. And Europe, it has its own project, the European Gateway, if I may. But so far, if you ask me to describe this project, I will have some difficulty, frankly, to give you the outline or what have been already implemented when it comes to that project. So my message here is that if we do not really take the necessary measure in terms of regionalization of our supply chains, in terms of looking at the larger region, not only the EU, in terms as an economic bloc, the eastern neighborhood, the southern neighborhood, and Africa beyond those two neighborhoods. If we do not look at how the private sector can get engaged in this effort to achieve more integration, more digital transition, for us to become more competitive in this new globalized but segmented economy, world economy, I think will be not rising to our citizen expectation. Just to give you a very small example, energy. And I'm not going to talk about IEMed gas, which is important because it will allow maybe Europe to be less dependent on other source of natural gas. No, let's talk about renewable. Studies are showing clearly that the southern Mediterranean region has the capacity to produce twice the actual consumption of Europe in terms of energy from renewables, sun, wind, and what comes with that in terms of green hydrogen and all the other derivatives that are sources of energy. But to do so, we need investments, we need interconnections, and we need an infrastructure. Do we really, are we really in this frame of mind in terms of an EU policy or a regional policy? We're not yet there. I see investments happening here and there. I see big European players like Siemens, like even Maersk, which is a shipping company, investing heavily in renewables in terms of to produce green source of energy for the shipping ships. But we don't see a comprehensive regional policy that will integrate the southern Mediterranean potential of producing huge amounts of clean energy into the larger energy market in the Euro-Mediterranean region. For us to do so, for us to build a more inclusive development model, a model that leaves no one behind, that creates decent employment for all, especially in the South Mediterranean, I don't think we can do it without a clear understanding of the regional dynamics and how each one of us would fit in a larger landscape of the overall economies at this regional level. If we manage to deal with this great, I would call it even existential issue of enhancing our economic cooperation and not be portrayed as the least integrated region of the world, I think we could deal with so many of the challenges, such as the great disparity in socio-economic development between the two shores of the Mediterranean, the big issue that is now in a way monopolizing the political elite attention when it comes to the southern Mediterranean region, which is migration. I mean, this is the number one issue when the southern Mediterranean region is mentioned, is the huge challenge of migration. Italy, France, and others. I was in Marseille 5 days ago, and I was impressed by a speech by the Pope on the subject matter, which was, in a sense, very critical of some of the Western policies when it comes to the issue of migration and the way we look at it, which should be seen as part of the problem and not the problem, and to look into a comprehensive approach that has an economic, a trade dimension, and also should include what I call intelligent mobility schemes in terms of, and also investing in skill development in our region and enhancing the qualification of people in our region so they can be productive within their own country and included in a larger economic cycle that would benefit Europe and also deal with the Europe challenge of an increasing demography without necessarily physically moving to the other shore of the Mediterranean. So as I said, I will end by maybe reading the paragraph Reem prepared, which describe integration as an opportunity to build a sustainable development and growth, not only to deal with climate emergency that we're facing, but also the incredible potential of our common sea. And here she's referring, and I am referring with her, to also the great potential of the blue economy. If we have also a regional approach to how to develop our common sea in a sustainable way, because this sea is facing so many existential dangers when it comes to climate change and when it comes to biodiversity and when it comes to tourism. This is the most exploited sea when it comes to tourism anywhere in the world. So if we do not change even that model into a much more sustainable model, a sea that has an economic value of $450 billion. It is considered actually the fifth largest economy after that of Italy, France, Spain. It will be the fourth, actually, if I'm not mistaken, economy in the Euro-Mediterranean region. So this is another example, if we cooperate, how to enhance and improve and create more value added while preserving our environment and protecting our Mediterranean. I will end my intervention here by saying that within our cooperation with GIZ and our colleagues in the OECD, we are now preparing the first steps to do our review of the regional integration report. That in itself, it is important, but what's more important that this new version of the regional integration report not only will include new parameters and indicators such as gender and environment, but, and this is for me is probably the most important dimension, is to try, of course, based on new data, serious and quantitative indicators, attempting to put a price tag on the cost of non-integration. That would be extremely important. Well, it's up to the expert in OECD to help us achieve that goal, but if we are able to showcase to our citizens and our decision makers the cost of non-integration in numbers, I think that would be a very powerful message that could, inshallah, as we say in our part of the region, wake up our political elite to do more when it comes to this very important subject. So in that spirit, we're looking very much into your discussion in the next couple of days, and we'll definitely learn a lot from them and from everything that the FEMISE network and our Barcelona-based prestigious institution, which is IEMed, is producing. I just brought with me actually my contribution to the yearly book, which is a very, very important document that I take great pleasure of reading it every year. And I wish you all a successful couple of days, and I assure you we will be always paying attention to your recommendation, your studies, and your great effort, because as I said, science policy nexus is extremely important if you want to push this region to do more and to do better. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, really, Ambassador. And according to your final words, you understand why it was for us so important to have you with us, because the Union for the Mediterranean, let's say, is the real issue. We are a network of researchers and research institutions, but we are in social sciences, in political sciences, and neutral science does not exist in this field. It is always policy-oriented according to certain values. And now the values we upstand are the values of the traditional Euro-Mediterranean partnership, that the Union for the Mediterranean is the real incarnation today. And you are the only one who is sitting in all configurations, for example, of the ministerial meetings in the Euromed configuration area, be it foreign affairs or development or women, whatever. And this is why we're absolutely eager and grateful that you are with us, because you have really to convey our policy-oriented research and recommendation and discussions to reach to the final point, which is in principle, or not the final, but the first important point, which is at the table of the ministerials of the Euromed area. So thank you very much for being with us. You know that you have in the FEMISE network an ensemble of I don't know how many dozen institutions who are devoting to research their best efforts to contribute to this common task that you are pointing out, to get a better, more progressive, more just Euro-Mediterranean area. And since I know that you have to go, now we can say goodbye to you for the time and continue with the normal proceedings of the conference. And really, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Since we are starting the real thing with FEMISE, I will put the president of FEMISE at the presidency.
Okay.
Please. And I will ask only as, let's say, master of ceremonies, which is what corresponds to the people of my age. Okay, so thank you very much, really. And we apologize for this kind of arrangement, but it was the only way Ambassador, well, the Secretary General of the Union of the Mediterranean could be with us, so we are grateful that he made it to spend with us a few minutes and to deliver his message. And so now I'm most pleased to pass the word to the President of FEMISE and Managing Director, Dr. Ibrahim El Badawi, to deliver his inaugural speech. Please, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It's a great pleasure to be with you here, this elegant premises of the IEMed, and the partnership between the Economic Research Forum and IEMed in the context of the FEMISE network has made it possible for us to hold the fairest meeting since COVID-19, physical meeting where we can actually meet each other and network in real time, as they say. And for this actually to happen, we would like to acknowledge the generous support from the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation, AECID, and also to thank Ms. Magarinos for being with us at this opening, and also to extend our thanks and appreciation to Mr. Pau Solenilas, the Commissioner of the International Relations and the City Promotion in the wonderful, stunning city of Barcelona. So the conference, I think, is an opportunity for us to address almost all of the issues that the Ambassador Kamil has talked about, the challenges and opportunities. The theme of the conference itself, shifting paradigms, opportunities for a deeper EU-Mediterranean integration in a changing world. I think that's the theme of the conference, is an epitome of the challenges and opportunities that we, and I characterize this in 5 angles. The first one is really the global supply chain disruptions that rocked the world economy, especially the southern part of the Mediterranean and Africa and the rest of the developing world, and even Europe itself. I think made it very clear that actually relocalization and regional cooperation and regional integration in any given neighborhood is very important. And in our neighborhood around the Mediterranean, as well as the neighbors of neighbors, the African neighbors of the Mediterranean, southern Mediterranean, are very important. I just came actually from Morocco, the Policy Center for the New South, which is an emerging, very active center on African economic issues. They address exactly similar issues in the context of Africa. So I think the fairest angle really is that this conference and the research that will be presented, including the most notably the panels, but also the comparative research, will actually underscore the challenges faced by the global supply chain, disruptions, and the consequences in terms of inflation and in terms of endangering food security, given the high dependence of our countries on food imports, including food imports from Ukraine and Russia. So this is really very important. The second pillar is the balance between politics and economics, because economics is very clear that actually there will be a win-win situation. But then the political economy involved and ensuring that, the politics is aligned in order to sustain the idea or the agenda for deeper economic integration. And obviously, substantively, climate change has to play a very significant role. And green growth, green economy, energy transition are very fundamental issues that needs to be integrated in a meaningful and systematic way in any initiative, Mediterranean initiative for deeper economic integration. And then, of course, the regional and global value networks has to hinge on technology, especially digital technology and the new economic order that's emerging as a result of this digital technology. And finally, youth. The youth of the Mediterranean will have to play a leading role in making this happen and also benefiting from it and hopefully securing their future for access to jobs and opportunities in the future. So this is a very interesting and important conference and a timely conference happening here in the city of Barcelona. and we really look forward to very interesting and engaging presentations and commentaries and discussions, and hopefully that eventually also we will have an opportunity or a capacity to engage stakeholders, especially policymakers on both sides of the Mediterranean, so that this research will have some impact. So without further ado, let me welcome you and thank you for your participation, and thank Ambassador Florenza and the IEMed and Managing Director Roger Albaniana and your colleagues for hosting us. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Dr. Brahim El-Badawi. And after these welcoming remarks and the speech of the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, comes the moment for the opening speeches by the institutions, let's say local institutions in the sense of the not only municipality of Barcelona, but the central Spanish government. And we are happy to have with us, first of all, Mr. Pau Solanilla, who is the Commissioner for City Promotion at Barcelona Municipality, Barcelona City Council. He is a man of the house, so I would say, and a friend of everybody in this house. So we are really very happy to receive you in your new authority. Welcome, and you have the floor, you have our amity, and you have the house at your disposal.
Thank you so much, Senen, friend. So, President of FEMISE, Directora, General Director, le Consul de la France, bonjour, ami. Thank you very much for the invitation, and on behalf of the Mayor of Barcelona, I would like to welcome you in our city. Well, I have the responsibility of international relations and city promotion, but Senen, you know the risk of having me in a Mediterranean debate, because despite of my institutional role, I'm an activist, and I'm a Mediterranean activist in a city that is a Mediterranean activist city. And so, therefore, you know that when I come, I would not like only to share institutional words. So I would really like to be involved in the debates. In that sense, I would like to share with you 6, if I can select this, provocative reflections that might be useful for your debates. The first is regarding the title, no? About integration. This is the first question mark. Can we talk about integration without having a common purpose in the region? In 2005 and 2015, when I was working in this house, there was a number of heads of state meetings, and there was the feeling that we had a common purpose, to have a community of destiny, the Mediterranean as a community of destiny. Is this still today the case? Can we talk about integration, economic integration, without having a common purpose? Because a purpose is not an objective. A purpose is something more transcendental. And I think we have to revisit the purpose of the Mediterranean. It's missing. There is a lack of common purpose. The second one is about, the second comment is about the vision. So a purpose needs a vision. And I think in today's world, that has been mentioned, we need to be connected, a connected region. A connected region to be embedded in the main value chains, economic value chains of the world. Obviously, the Mediterranean is a place where 15% of the goods travel in boats, etc. So this is logistics, but logistics is probably one of the value chains with less added value. So we need to rethink what are the global value chains that we want to be embedded in the Mediterranean. And we need probably a kind of smart specialization. We cannot be in everything, but we can be good in a few things. So as the Secretary General of the UPM says, no, there is a lot of potential, unexplored potential. So we need to be connected economically. We need to be connected physically. We have good ports, physical fiber cables, connection, etc. But there is a third one, what is the emotional connection that is linked to the purpose. And there is an uncomfortable truth. Can we talk about integration without talking about mobility? Is this possible? Obviously no, and I think that Europe has a responsibility on that. So we need 70 million economic immigrants until 2050. And it's a taboo to talk about immigration in Europe. So how can we talk about integration, about common purpose, without talking about mobility, about ordinated migration? So this is probably one of the uncomfortable truths that in any economic debate might be on the table. Third, I think that we need, and I'm not an expert, I'm not an economist, but we need a comprehensive economic agenda. And probably a comprehensive economic agenda nowadays in the Mediterranean is somehow an extension of the European Green Deal, a Mediterranean Green Deal. It's about competitiveness, it's about sustainability, it's about equality, about social justice. So this is a natural agenda, a natural extension, and Europe should take the responsibility to extend this agenda into the south. We are talking internationally about reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring. There are keywords that are in fashion. And when you look into the world map, the reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, many American companies are doing that with Mexico. How many European companies are doing that with the south of the Mediterranean? A few of them. I think there is a lot of room to do so. No? This relocation, reshoring, friendshoring is from China to some other neighboring countries, but not necessarily into the Mediterranean, as an opportunity of reindustrialization, as an opportunity of jobs, etc. So we need a comprehensive economic agenda. The fourth is about smart alliances. I mean, if we do not have an integrated region, if we don't have a common sense of community, probably we need some smart alliances. We talk to everyone, but we need quick wins to show that this path that is working is possible. It's an utopia to think that we are going to move all together in the same direction. So we need tangible, quick things to show that this integration is possible, that is going in the right direction. And in that sense, another uncomfortable truth. Economic development is about innovation. Innovation is the killer application in today's world. Who are the main protagonists of innovation in the world? Youth and women, women and youth. And in the Mediterranean, women and youth are somehow, there is a ceiling from certain elites that have fears to liberate the potential of talent in the region. Unless we liberate, we break down these ceilings, and we allow youth and women to exploit all the talent that there is in the region might be underdeveloped. So I think this is another uncomfortable truth. And finally, let me talk about the role of the cities in that sense. I think that there's an expression that I like, is the strength of the weak ties. The states used to cooperate in a formal ways, Union for the Mediterranean and some other formats, with embassies, institutions, offices, etc. Cities will go below radar, working in networks like FEMISE, and probably in today's world and in the region with such a number of obstacles, the non-formal organizations, so the networks, can be an exceptional ally to develop, to move towards the economic integration. And in that sense, I think that the states should see the city diplomacy, city networks, and other networks like FEMISE, and the extraordinary potential tools to remove barriers or to work sometimes below radar, overcome some of these obstacles that we have in order to have these quick wins, these tangible wins. So this is why Barcelona is at your disposal with the network of med cities and some other to help in this direction. We truly believe this region has a potential, but that we need to have the courage to remove the obstacles that we have in front of us. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Pau. Really, I must acknowledge two facts. One is that really you learn fast because it's your recent position in the municipality but you know already everything that the municipality needs. And the second fact is that previously as well, you learned a lot in this house. And this is the good results that we get now. So thank you very much really for being with us. And now we come to Carmen Magariños, Director General at the European Agency for International Cooperation to Development. I must thank Carmen for being with us. She's made the effort of coming from Madrid to be with us today. She's in charge of the cooperation for development with this area of the world, but not only Africa and the whole of Asia, etc. So she has a lot of responsibilities that I know somehow. And there is another extremely important quality for us, that is that she is a prominent member of our board of governance at the Institute. And so thank you very much, really, Carmen, for being with us. And in this specific case, for having been absolutely crucial in the decision, because it was in fact your own, to help support this endeavor with FEMISE, and it is thanks to the Spanish Agency for International Cooperation that we could get the financement to have this annual conference of FEMISE and the corresponding activities along the year, and next one and another third activity that we'll have in Tunisia in the following months in connection with the programs of FEMISE and programs of the agency. So anyway, Carmen, thank you really very much for being with us. We appreciate your effort coming. We appreciate your support. And, well, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senen, and it's always a pleasure to be here. He was too modest, but I do have the pleasure to occupy the position that he occupied in the past. So that's why he knows perfectly well what I do, and I hope that he's a nice judge of what I do. Thank you, Senen, and thank you, President, Commissioner. For me, as I just said, it's a pleasure to represent the IECID, the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation, here today. And I thank IEMed for the invitation to participate in this opening session of the annual conference of FEMISE, whose objectives are very relevant and timely. A supportive and fair Mediterranean region, better integrated to face common challenges, is today more necessary than ever for all the reasons that the Secretary General of UFN just described. So really honored to participate in this session. Thank you. We all know that, but I want to reiterate that the Mediterranean is a priority region for Spanish foreign policy. Our strong political commitment with the region is translated in our support to the Barcelona process of Euro-Mediterranean Association and the 5+5 dialogue of the Western Mediterranean. The establishment of Barcelona is good news, not only because we like to be in Barcelona, because the city has become a hub for regional dialogue, and is a clear consequence of the commitment of the city, of Barcelona, and of Spain as a whole to the region. The Secretary General was also mentioning the 15 years of the Union for the Mediterranean, and the fact is that we find ourselves 15 years after here today, debating our common challenges, surrounded by experts, analysts, and representatives of organizations devoted to the Mediterranean. And this is the proof that the Mediterranean has contributed to the dynamism of Barcelona as much as Barcelona contributes every day to the dynamism of the Mediterranean region. In light of this commitment, we are happy to support the IEMed. And as you mentioned, we have been supporting it for many years, and year after year, the work you do continue to be convinced that we have to maintain this support. So I sincerely thank you and the institution for your work, the excellence and professionalism with which you managed to keep our common agenda alive. But the Mediterranean is also a priority, and I'm speaking here as a director in the IEMed, as is also a priority for the Spanish cooperation. We disbursed, the people say that it's not elegant to talk about figures, but sometimes it's useful to measure what is our actual current investment. So in terms of our size, we have an important investment in the region. In 21, around 23 million. In 22, around 27 million. So the tendency is an increasing tendency, and we don't have the figures for this year, but this tendency will be confirmed. We have established an intense bilateral relationship with each one of our priority partners, and we have also, and I think is especially pertinent to mention it here, we also have a regional strategy to work, to face, to try to work together on the common challenges that we have all together. This regional strategy is called the MASAR program. The MASAR has been active and alive for more than a decade now. At the beginning was linked especially to institutional support and governance programs, but we have progressively enriched our program with specific lines working on gender equality or water policies, which we identified as key development factors. We are proud of what we have been doing during these 10 years, but we think it's time to go further. The theme, as the President was saying, the theme of the session today points it's very clear. We are in a time of major geopolitical and economic paradigm shifts, and therefore it's time for our MASAR, for our regional program to evolve, to give way to new strategies, new objectives, a new vision, as you were saying, that is adapted to the current reality of the Mediterranean. Because, and I would like to stress this point, that we want to work for the current reality. We are trying not to reproduce instruments or programs that have worked in the past, but the reality goes faster than us, and we need to adapt. And that's why thinking, writing, and talking together is very important, and these 3 days that you are going to be together are going to be key. From an economic point of view, there is challenges in terms of employment, commerce, but there is an element that has also been already mentioned, that we want to be the dorsal spine of our work in the coming years, and is the challenges for the future of the region, that are the challenges for the future of the youth of the region. We have to look to the new generations and understand that they need not only analysis, but they need proposals and they need solutions. So in order to create opportunities, that is at the end of the day the major challenge that we have ahead, we also have to work on connectivity, as it has already been mentioned, especially in an economic level, but not only. And the policy making has also been mentioned, so I don't want to repeat. So taking all this in consideration, we are convinced that FEMISE can be an essential partner for us in this new endeavor that we have ahead. Your trajectory, contributing for more than 25 years to research and dialogue on priority economic development issues such as unemployment, entrepreneurship, trade, and regional integration, places you as the perfect potential partner in trying to understand the dynamics of the region and correct the inequalities or the imbalances or the strategies that we need to address because they limit the growth of the Mediterranean. I want to point out also a specific element with which we are really committed, and is employment. We are committed to address this challenge at different levels. Bilaterally, the Spanish cooperation have intense working agenda within the countries where we work, focused on the creation of employment and vocational training opportunities, with a particular emphasis on initiatives for youth, as I was mentioning. But within the European Union, we have also been fully associated with the Team Europe initiative on employment through trade and investment, and we have been associated since the beginning of the initiative because we think it's a very important one. Ambassador Kamel mentioned it because we work also with the Union for the Mediterranean on that. And we are co-leading what we call, I'm sorry for the technicality, the third pillar, but I think it's important to mention it because it's focused on entrepreneurship, and this is one of the elements that are going to boost the economic development in the future. At regional level, Spain and the European Commission will continue to back and to support initiatives that seek to deepen the understanding of the challenges ahead. And in this framework, IEMed has decided this year, 23, to provide a grant to FEMISE to develop a research and dialogue program for the promotion of inclusive entrepreneurship of young people and women in the southern neighborhood. So as you see, you are able to put all together in a program the different elements that I have been mentioning as our priorities, and we are very thankful that we have a platform with you to be able to do it. This will allow us to work on two lines that we consider essential. One is to promote reflection, scientific research and dialogue on the opportunities and challenges to build a better integrated region at a time of transitions. It has already been mentioned. And the second one is contributing to development of inclusive and evidence-based public policies by research. And I cannot reinforce, coming from an institution myself, the need to have evidence-based information, data and analysis to feed our public policies. So this annual conference, which brings us all together today, I think is a brilliant starting point to advance along this line. And I just want to conclude expressing my gratitude again to the organizers and all the speakers who will allow this fruitful exchange and necessary reflection. I hope that results will feed us all and would work these days. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Carmen. Really, it's a good starting point. We received a lot of inputs, I would say, of enlightening reflections that will help us because we are engaged in this c'est un projet de longue haleine. I understand that we are French and English unequals food at FEMISE because I like to recall that FEMISE was one of the great networks that was created already in '95 at the beginning of the Barcelona process, and the two big networks, FEMISE and Euromesco for political and security affairs, are still alive and working well with dozens and dozens of researchers engaged in this big project. We have had ups and downs in that, in the region, and it is true that there was an upcoming tide, and then this upburst at one point, brilliant with the Arab Springs, and then failure of this first effort, I would say. And I say first because I don't know whether it will take 5 more years or 15 more years or 20 more years. But what is for sure is that this region cannot be an exception in the world, and it will catch up with the general trend, which is toward the more stable societies, let's hope, in the world. And in fact, it has been said by the Secretary General, there has been some some progress. And we have all been involved in trying to foster economic growth and development in the region. And, well, the European Union, the Spanish Agency of International Cooperation, roughly the European Union is as institution, not, apart from the efforts of the member states, have been spending, let's say, 1 billion per year in the southern neighborhood, plus 2 billion from the European Investment Bank. And there has been some progress. When we started at the first sessions, annual conferences of FEMISE, we usually said that was the gap between north and south of the Mediterranean was about 14 times. Now we say, according to some figures, that maybe are about 10 to 11 times. So there has been some project. The problem is that to catch up at that rhythm would take 50 years or more. And this is what is not acceptable. To look at it from another side, I believe that what it really, well, there has been some pressure. If we take what used to be considered le meilleur exemple, le meilleur élève du partenariat, c'était le Maroc. They had been growing less than 1% in the previous decade, and then by 2005, when it was already in full work, the partnership and so on, for that period, till the Arab Springs, it was like 3.5. So it was an improvement. The only point is that to become a tiger, as the Southeast Asia tigers, you need a rhythm of development of more than 7% sustained for more than 15 years. So there has been improvement. The problem is that it has not been enough. And now, well, you are all the economists to see how can we fix the engine, because it is evident that the engines we had were working, but not enough. And then it is obvious, it is true that an overwhelming, an incredible array of conflicts and wars fell over the region. An incredible accumulation of conflicts. I don't know, I don't need to go and enumerate them, from the Middle East conflict to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, Syria, Libya, etc., no? And the terrorism around the world. But we will overcome, as we said when we were at the universities many years ago. And there is some progress, but it would take too long to go at the current speed. We have to improve things, and that's our task. We are economists, and we have to try to give the best. This is what I was saying to the Secretary General. Well, I was telling him, you have here a few dozen researchers in the economic field that would try to give you the best recipes to improve things. And now it is our turn to try to find which are these best recipes to go to where we want to go. We started, we know the final direction since '95 to have this region in peace and development and progress and cultural understanding and so on. But it takes a long time. But we will persist. Even if it takes 30 more years, we'll be there improving things. So thank you very much. And we'll give for finalized this starting session. Thank you. Et donc, il a... Sí, ahora habrá otros, ¿no? Así. Hey, photo, family photo up just here, out there, at the stairs, so that everybody becomes visible. Before the next session, we walk out for a minute and we take the nice picture for your souvenirs. When you're getting older, you'll remember this occasion.
It always happens. Yeah, now I think it works. Can you hear me now? Yes? Okay, good afternoon. I was saying that we are a bit behind the schedule, so I'll try to speed up, especially because one of the speakers is waiting or has been waiting for some time. But allow me to express, first of all, my gratitude to both the IEMed team, headed by Antoine, and also the FEMISE team, headed by Maryse, for this very constructive collaboration on the organization of this annual conference. Of course, we are delighted and excited to host you all here in Barcelona at the IEMed, and we are also very happy because we are going to, after the opening session, we are now going to move to the first plenary session entitled Towards Greater Euro-Mediterranean Regional Integration, Rebalancing the Geopolitical Landscape with Economic Opportunities. We've got among us 5 outstanding speakers, which I will present right away, but allow me to structure very briefly the debate. I think, and it was recalled by the UFM Secretary General, that the region is in a worse shape than 10, 20 years ago. In fact, I was about to say, I think that, but when the Secretary General actually stated, then I feel relieved. The COVID-19 pandemic and the effects of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, coupled with the climate emergency that some of the speakers refer to, have accumulated to a number of ongoing challenges that existed before 2019. This outlook is not homogeneous across the region. We cannot speak, well, the whole region is in disarray, because if we compare the Human Development Index in the countries of the region in the past 12 years, we will realize that, for instance, Egypt and Morocco are the only two countries that have escalated positions, whereas Algeria and Jordan are kind of stagnated. And then Lebanon, Syria, and Libya have plummeted completely, and then Tunisia is also slowly but steadily declining. The aggression against Ukraine has accelerated multipolarity in a highly fragmented landscape, both between countries, but also within countries. I think that I cannot recall, if we go back to the 1980s or even to the 1970s, a situation like the one that we are going through at the moment. Basically because before we lived in a bipolar world, which was dangerous, but it was easier to handle, whereas now it's completely multipolar. And if you just look what has happened in the last 3 months, the type of meetings, alliances that have been forged, you will see that multipolarity has become the rule. In our region, in the Mediterranean region, the Gulf countries have taken their own position, not always aligned with the West. The disarray that we are experiencing in the Sahel region has some spillovers in the Southern Med and also into the Southern Mediterranean. Ukraine is also changing Russia's image in the region, and the European Union is falling back on transactionalism with the Southern Mediterranean, as we are witnessing in numerous dossiers like the migration file. But most worryingly, in the region, in the last years, we have also witnessed a social and economic collapse in some of the countries that are very difficult to turn around, to combat, to counter. There is no appetite for reforms in general. This is not something that goes back to the 2019. It dates back to even before, and there are mounting levels of despair. Speaking about despair, I think that there is no room for despair, especially not here in FEMISE. Now, President of IEMed was referring to that. We have to remain optimistic, because it is true that a few years ago we were speaking of the positive agenda for the Mediterranean. Everybody was saying, well, we need to turn our rhetoric or our narrative into a positive agenda for the Mediterranean. Nowadays, not a single person speaks about the positive agenda for the Mediterranean, because everything that we see, that we perceive, is so negative that we no longer speak of a positive agenda. But I call here that we need to speak of a positive agenda for the Mediterranean. We need to look at the possibilities. We need to look at this unexploited potential that the Secretary General was speaking about. How we can better mobilize the few resources that we have in order to be effective, in order to be action and results oriented. And of course, to that end, we need to understand what is happening. We need to analyze, and here is where science, where all of us as scientists, as researchers, we can contribute and we can fit into the policy debate. And we cannot simply conclude that regional integration will be the solution to our problems, because realistically speaking, and again the Secretary General has referred to that before, regional integration that was in the foundation of the Barcelona process has been very intangible in the region in the last decades. There has not been meaningful progress, despite, of course, the efforts from the intergovernmental and the European Union institutions, from the European Commission, first of all, from the UFM, the OECD, that is tasked with not only the preparation of the initial report on regional integration, but now with the preparation of the review report on regional integration. Well, all of that brings me to our beloved speakers for today. So giving you some elements for discussions and debate. And we have, as I said, five very outstanding speakers, starting with Birgit Löser, who will be with us from Brussels, and then continuing with Alia Muvayet, Massimo De Andres, Carlos Conde, and Katarzyna Zidlo. So I will, if Birgit is there, and she's there, and thank you very much for waiting your time. We are a Mediterranean network, and unfortunately, things sometimes do not happen on time, but thank you very much. Birgit is the head of division and regional affairs for the MENA region from the European External Action Service. She's a senior EU official with more than 25 years of professional experience in the EU's foreign and security policy, and nowadays she's also co-presiding the Union for the Mediterranean on behalf of the European Union, or the Northern Co-Presidency. So Birgit, thank you very much for being with us, and let me ask you a couple of questions that might guide your first intervention, which are the geopolitical paradigm shifts. What impact on the Euro-Mediterranean region? What are the elements that give it greater importance in the current context? And then also how to bring the focus of the EU back to the southern neighborhood. Again, Birgit, thank you very much for joining us today. And the floor is yours, of course.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear us, me here, fine?
Absolutely, perfect.
Can you hear me? Super. Thank you for that. Thank you for the organizers for this opportunity to present an EU perspective to those questions that you've been asking, and I'm hoping to also demonstrate the very positive attitude that the EU is having towards the southern neighborhood, and there is no going back to it. It is that we have been walking all along together in various difficult scenarios. So in answer to your question, let me outline a few points
Well, thank you. Thank you, Birgit. Thank you for taking the time. It is impressive, the amount of programs, instruments, resources that, well, now you have, your image has disappeared from the screen, so that the EU has put in place, yet one of the speakers that preceded us in the opening session spoke of the need to foster, he said, a vision, a purpose of what the Euro-Mediterranean partnership means. And I truly think that we have a bit, because of the situation, because of all the problems, we have lost a little bit this vision, this purpose, as we used to have it in the past. So if we add to the array of instruments and programs that you have put on the table, this vision that can only be created by the consultation of the countries or the governments and the civil society, this vision, this purpose, of course, the effect of all these policies will be much higher, I'm sure. But anyway, thank you very much, Birgit. Let's move on to our next speaker, who is Alia Mouvayed, who is the managing director at Fixed Income Strategy at Jefferies, and she's from from Lebanon originally, but not living in Lebanon. Alia has like a very broad experience in investment banking, but also in the central bank, because she started working in the central bank of Lebanon. I don't know if you know, but the governor of the central, or the former governor of the Central Bank of Lebanon, was the longest serving governor ever in any country in the world, and he finally stepped down, I think, a couple of months ago, and of course, he's being pursued. Anyway, so she has an experience in the Central Bank of Lebanon and also in the Lebanese Ministry of Trade and Economy, just when Lebanon was negotiating the association agreement with the EU. That was more than 20 years ago. Anyway, Alia, we are very happy to have you among us, and I will be asking you a couple of very short questions. How to achieve greater financial and economic stability in the region, and how can regional integration better allow to seize the development opportunities emerging in the current context? So 2 easy questions for you, but please go ahead.
I think, thank you again for IEMed for the invitation and for being part of this grouping again. Indeed, I have collaborated with FEMISE when we were negotiating the EU association agreement more than 20 years ago. And I think regarding the SMCs, I want to start by saying that given those geopolitical and geoeconomic shifts that we have been talking about, you asked me about perception from the SMCs towards these shifts and how do they see it themselves. I mean, no doubt the SMCs are at the heart of these important shifts. We've heard about the COVID pandemic and the impact of the supply chains, and given the commodity dependence of many of these SMCs, whether Egypt or Morocco, in terms of grains or generally in hydrocarbon. And the war in Ukraine, actually, again, because I'm an economist, we have to stress that it has exacerbated the existing macro vulnerabilities that have been at the forefront of the socio-economic woes that led to the Arab Spring in 2011. So we have to be reminded that those macroeconomic vulnerabilities are still there and have now, given the global context of higher rates for longer, even making it much harder for some of these southern Mediterranean countries that are running twin deficits. But I think also the region is being affected by the region's main donors' change of priorities. We've heard whether the EU now being pulled into Ukraine, but also more importantly for the region and for the southern Mediterranean countries, is really the outlook and the priorities of the GCC, which has become a much more important donor over the last few years since the Arab Spring, in supporting particularly countries like Egypt, but not only, and rendering basically their aid paradigm increasingly more linked to geoeconomic interests. And that is important, and I'll come back to it as we think about how to think about regional integration and the role of the GCC. And finally, I think the SMCs perception is being shaped by this new emerging alliances within the region and outside the region that our previous colleague talked about. And that is obviously pulling them into a different direction, both in terms of their political foreign policy choices, but also about their economic priorities. So in terms of how they are perceiving these changes, I think first they are concerned about obviously the unraveling of how weak state responses in many of the South American have been to the COVID pandemic, and it has created a lot of problems in terms of the response. Sorry. Second, there is a concern, as I mentioned, that the interest of the EU is transiting away and away from, is shifting away from them, and that the multilateral solidarity that they need to face these macroeconomic challenges actually and which has been necessary, and we have seen it very strongly during COVID, is actually waning down, and we are seeing it less and less as many of these countries are grappling with this huge debt problems. And again, Tunisia, Egypt, but also Jordan and of course Lebanon are countries that have concern. So there is this concern about the heavy impact of the Ukraine war, and that they are not being shouldered into basically mitigating that impact. But I think also the perception is one of opportunism, in the sense that many of these Southern Mediterranean countries have thought that, okay, I mean, maybe now we can extract more of Europe, right? We are seeing it also, particularly economically, in the way the demand for aid is being formulated to face the problem of migration. Tunisia, again, is a very important problem. But also in terms of creating this narrative that it is that our economic problem are actually because the West has chosen to go on to the war in Ukraine, and then has left us down, and you have you need to basically help us more through budget support, whether it is through the IMF or the World Bank, etc. So they are trying to be more opportunistic about these geopolitical shifts, but opportunistic not only in terms of ways that lead to tenuous relationship with the EU, but I think opportunistic also sometimes in a constructive engagement way. And we have seen this economically on two key issues, which are food security and energy security. And I think maybe we should, as we think about further integration, we should build on these areas of constructive engagement, but also try to see that particularly with the investment in renewables, the IEMed that have been talked about, and try to see how we can change the dynamics of these tenuous relationships when it comes to the role of international financial institutions, particularly the role of the IMF in Southern Mediterranean countries, at a time where we are seeing actually a lot of difficulty in many countries, particularly Tunisia, Lebanon, sometimes Egypt. We will see now, given the election, in moving ahead with engaging with the IMF, and whether there is a need to rethink modalities of international cooperation to support economic fragility in the region. Now, okay, how do we get towards greater financial stability? I mean, to be honest, I think it is not only about the economics. And I think what Dr. Al-Badawi said yesterday, we really need to better understand the political economy and what is driving the fact that there is no demand for reform in many countries in the region, as you just said, the lack of willingness to reform. I mean, there's no doubt that, in my view, there are at least, we need to pursue ways to recover or improve the macroeconomic outlook in those countries, at least at sea level. The first one is really addressing the short-term macroeconomic challenges, which are particularly plaguing Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, but that the EU cannot do alone or bilaterally with the countries. And in this context that I've drawn, the role of the GCC has become increasingly important, and the EU should increasingly work with the GCC to face and to think outside the box about ways to support the short-term financing constraints that many of these countries are facing and that are creating this political and migration tension with the EU. The second level is accelerating the structural reform, because for a long time we have stopped, or we have dragged our feet in the southern Mediterranean, maybe except Morocco, I would say, on structural reform to unlock opportunities for the private sector. Particularly after COVID, this is what is needed. And I think the agenda here, whether with the EU, whether in terms of providing financing facility directly to the private sector, helping countries where the financial sector is not being able basically to lend because the government is over-dominant in the economies, that is very important. And third is investing in the climate resilience, because that's what is clearly threatening the future stability, and both macroeconomically, but also in terms of the social level. Again, I mean, I won't enter into the details, but here the agenda is a huge, whether both on adaptation or mitigation, but in the short run, really investing into helping the renewables to ensure that the approach of the EU is not a transactional to ensure that the EU cares only about ensuring its energy security, but rather that it is here to also develop alternative sources of energy that is less reliant on fossil fuel in the region, and that is both benefiting them macroeconomically. And that brings me to the final point on the what can be done differently in the next phase, I would say on the regional trade and economic integration agenda. I mean, we all know, and it has been mentioned, obviously, how thin is still the intra-regional trade, despite the openness of many of the southern of the MENA economies. And this thin intra-regional trade is both with the EU, but within the region, with the EU, but also with the GCC. And therefore, I think if we need to think that achieving fully the benefits of regional trade integration requires a reform of trade policies to break down barriers, both still within the region, but also increasingly develop the connectivities further, whether in the context of the EU's global gateway. But what would be different this time is how do we try and bring in the GCC into the picture even more forcefully, whether in terms of connectivity, so that the southern Mediterranean countries don't get completely bypassed by whatever new ambitious corridors the GCC wants to do with India and Europe, for example, or whether in terms helping to deepen the trade agreement between the GCC and the EU on one hand, and in parallel, the GCC and the southern Mediterranean countries, particularly on the services side, on the mobility of people, and also measures to improve trade facilitation, both within the region and therefore integrating trade infrastructure, ports, airports, and logistics in a way that can benefit this within intra-regional trade and the EU SMC trade. Now, obviously, we can go more into the details, but I think finally also the approach to energy security will have to tackle the macroeconomic vulnerabilities, and that can be by bringing the global gateway investment into electricity grids and renewables in a way to reduce basically the significant reliance that is weighing on the external and fiscal balances of southern Mediterranean countries.
Thank you, Alia. Thank you. If we do it for one, we do it for all. Well, thank you very much for touching upon many different aspects. I would retain of the many things that you said, the role that the GCC already stating the role that the GCC means the countries of the GCC already have in the region. It is interesting to point out that the EU has a has a structured dialogue with the GCC. In a couple of weeks in Oman, they are going to hold their biannual meeting. But it is true that it's bilateral EU-GCC. And perhaps one of the ideas that sometimes the Commission is always like doing papers and the External Action Service is how to make it triangular.
Yeah.
So how you connect not only EU with GCC, but EU, GCC, and Southern Med countries.
Yes.
An idea that, of course, could be extended also to Sub-Saharan Africa, or to the Sahel, and so on and so forth. Anyway, thank you very much. And now we move to the next speaker, who is Massimo De Andres, the Director General at CRM, an economic research center related to the Intesa Sao Paulo banking group. Which is specialized in the Italian economy, energy issues, and maritime economy from a European, but also from a Mediterranean perspective. And we also know that you are currently the president of the Italian Society of Business Economists. Then, well, thank you very much for joining us. Then we have a couple of questions for you too. I will read one, and then you answer based on the questions that we send to you. What are the trends that reinforce the geostrategic place of the Mediterranean, I understand, worldwide?
So thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. It's an honor to be here. You already introduced me, but I just want to fix one point. I think it's important also talking about the Mediterranean area to underline that I work for a research center which is part of a bank. Intesa San Paolo is the leading Italian bank, one among the top 5 European banks, and we have many subsidiary banks, 11 subsidiary banks, especially in the Mediterranean area. So it's interesting to note that a bank, a major Italian bank, invests in a research center devoted to analyze the Mediterranean area, and especially one key point of our analysis is the maritime economy. It's all about ports, logistics, all about energy flows, and so on. So I will try to answer your questions from this angle, the perspective of the maritime economy, which is a key to understand what is happening in the Mediterranean. We have to think that the Mediterranean is 20% of the global shipping trade. I have some slides that help me to fix some points, so this is the reason why I ask you to follow what I said, I'm saying with these slides. Just to remember that 90% of the global trade is by maritime mode. So maritime economy is also an interesting point of view to analyze the global economic trends. And a lot of these maritime flows pass through the Mediterranean. And we have, in a certain way, what I call a certain divergence between the geopolitical framework that we know is in the Mediterranean is very gloomy. It's gloomy because we have political and military tensions, we have migration crisis, we have big problems for also food supply after the Russian and Ukrainian war, we have instability, social instability. So this is the political, geopolitical framework, but from the geoeconomic landscape, we have on the other side a Mediterranean which is more and more important. This is something we have to remember. Think about that if we put together the GDP of Europe and the GDP of the MENA countries, we have more or less 24 trillion of GDP, which is more or less the same GDP of the United States and far more of the GDP of China. That means that if we look the Mediterranean from an Asian perspective, to reach the Mediterranean means to reach one of the most important GDP areas, to reach the middle of one of the most important GDP areas in the world. And the only option, if you come from Asia, to reach the Atlantic coast of the United States. So this is the reason why we have these strong numbers. And in a context where we have a sort of regionalization of the globalization, so I don't think the globalization is over, but this is clearly evident that we have a sort of regionalization at the level of the, the regional free zones area. So we have NAFTA and America. We have the European Union and the Euro-Mediterranean area. We have the African continental free trade area. We have the regional comprehensive economic partnership. So we have different regions in the world. If you think that point, the point is that the Mediterranean is the only place where all these macro regions can meet all together. There are other places where these macro regions can meet. I mean, when I'm talking about meeting, I'm talking about trade. If you take, for example, Panama Strait, Panama is bilateral between Pacific and Atlantic. You have the Malacca Strait from Asia to the Gulf. But the only place, and there is a physical place, the physical place is the Suez Canal. And I know what I'm talking about because one of our subsidiary banks is Alex Bank, one of the major Egyptian banks. So we work for our colleagues in Egypt to analyze also the situation of the Suez Canal. And you have some key numbers. The Suez Canal, notwithstanding the war, notwithstanding tension, notwithstanding all we know, is growing and growing. And if we look in details, the kind of ships passing through the Suez Canal, we see that there is a sort of the leveraging of the big ships from Asia to Europe and an increase of regional traffic. This is an important point. Another point I want to fix together with you, having seen all these big changes and having seen that we have certain global situation like United States, China, the coupling, that is something that we have to deal with. We have the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we have the global political tension and so on. What are the three key main changing that are affecting the Mediterranean? We are moving from global routes, from the maritime perspective, this is very clear, from global routes to regional routes. We have more short sea shipping, more ro-ro instead of container ship. We have a change from global supply chain, so I mean what we call the equatorial globalization that was typical of what is, in a certain way, the past globalization. I produce in China, then there is a part of the production in Europe, then the final market can be in the United States. The just-in-time was the model, very quickly. All was running very, very fast around the global routes. We are moving into a shortening of global value chain, more shortened. And here again, the Mediterranean is having its own momentum, I think, also for the near-shoring or friend-shoring process. And the third point is what is especially related to the Europe policies, the shift between the energy mix dependent on fossils to an energy mix based on renewables. And here again, we have a new potential partnership with the South Mediterranean. And my point, this is one of the most important points I want, key part I want to underline on my presentation. The ports are at the meeting point of all these three dimensions, because the process of the regionalization of the globalization that is fostering regional routes, as I said, can positively influence the Mediterranean ports, because, speaking in general terms, Mediterranean ports are better equipped to receive this type of traffic, so the short sea shipping, rather than mega container ship. The restructuring of global supply chain, especially in some strategic manufacturing sector, I have an example just in a couple of slides, will stress the role of some Mediterranean ports also as logistics hubs, together with some free zones. The case of Tanger-Med is very, very, very clear. And the third point, the EU net zero emission goals and the energy transition is fostering a new role of ports also as energy hubs. And this is something new, because we are normally thinking about ports as the place where goods or people come and go. But now ports are also energy hubs. Just some key evidence, very short. regional routes are growing. In the last year, plus 5.6%, while the global routes are declining minus 3%. Another interesting point is to note that the Mediterranean ports have increased their efficiency according to the UNCTAD liner shipping connectivity index. Looking at the last 10 years, but especially from 2020, as you can see, the southern ports, I mean both the European Mediterranean ports, which is the green line, but also, and especially for some ports more than the European ports, the MENA ports, which is the red line, have gained competitiveness in comparison, so I've gained the ranking, so lower gap in comparison with the North European ports, which are still at the top ranking, but they lost a little bit and not, I mean, a large part of their competitiveness. The second key element is, as I said, the role of ports in the restructuring of global supply chain. Here we have 3 examples in the automotive sector. I have already mentioned IEMed, which is now not only a perfect success story, we call, in terms of port evolution and growth, but also an example of North-South regional supply chain integration in this sector. Now Morocco is the most important car producer in Africa, with more than 700,000 cars a year. I come from Torino. Torino was the Fiat-based home, so I know what I'm talking about. Now Italy is not anymore producing 700,000 cars a year, okay? And Morocco is the most important African producer, the most important exporter from Africa to Europe, especially Spain, France, and Italy. And a large part of this is done with trade relation via ports. Marseille, Genoa, and IEMed. Something similar we will see. I'm very positive on that point of view in Algeria, because Fiat, Stellantis car makers, is planning to produce 4 out of 6 of the new Fiat model in Algeria, and this will be possible only increasing logistic and shipping connection between Algeria and Genoa, Marseille, France, and Italy, because France and Italy are subcontractors. There's a lot of subcontractors. So I have to close. The last point is energy. As I said, energy. I really think that I try to come to the key point. I really think that energy is a boost for the cooperation between the North and the South. Why? Because the zero emission target of Europe is possible to reach only if we also import renewables. We have to increase our production of renewables, of course, but we need also to import. And it's possible to import renewables only from North Africa. Now technology brings it possible what it was not possible before. For example, to produce electricity with a solar plant in Algeria, to transform with power-to-gas technology into synthetic gas, and to use the existing pipelines to blend it or to transform in hydrogen. So pipelines arrive close to ports. Ports are the place where you have the chemical industry that we need as Europeans to transform, thinking at the biofuel, for example. Near ports, you have the big industry that will need to use hydrogen. So the flow between the south to the north, Europe needs to convert the energetic dialogue that already has with North Africa, but is on fossils, and give this perspective to the South Mediterranean countries of a new dialogue based on renewables. And this is my very last point. Think about that when you buy gas as European, there is just, I mean, a commodity, and on the other side, you have a money flow. But if you have a partnership on renewables, that means solar, wind plants, or hydrogen, you have also an industrial cooperation, because under a solar plant or a wind plant, you have manufacturing, you have maintenance, you have services. That means industrial and economic cooperation. So I really think that these three areas of cooperation, I mean, logistic for trade, logistic for industry, and energy comes all together to the port as a pole of development. So Europe needs to invest more, but when I said Europe, I'm not saying Brussels. I'm also saying the economy. So we as a bank, we believe that these are sectors where we have to invest, and we pay a lot of attention in all these countries to all the opportunity to invest in this sector, because I think, to final reply to your question, that these are the keys where we can invest if we want to improve integration, economic integration around the Mediterranean. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Massimo, because you actually made reality what I said before. We need a positive agenda. You brought up a positive agenda where change is already happening. We're seeing it in IEMed, which is not only the port, but as you said, all the private sector ecosystem that is built around the port, and all the logistic activities and the different projects that are being replicated across the region, which gives us hope to advance in this agenda of integration, at least on cooperation first and later on integration. Let us now move to Carlos Conde, who is the head of the MENA division in OECD. I would say, well, Carlos for many years has been involved in various positions in OECD, but I would say that the role and the incidence of OECD within the region has exponentially increased after you took over the head of the division. The truth is that we cooperate very closely with OECD. OECD, as the Secretary General of the UFM said, cooperates very closely with the UFM on the regional integration. So I think that you have a lot to say on the subject of today's session. By the way, Carlos, before joining OECD, he was a professor at the Granada University. I had to explain that. So.
Thank
Carlos,
you, Roger, but I want my question, because I prepared an answer to your question.
To my question. My question is, to which extent does the post-COVID-19 context highlight the comparative advantage of the southern Mediterranean countries, and what is to be done to fully exploit it, and what role for regional integration, and of course what you do as intergovernmental organization?
Thank you so much, Roger, for your very kind introduction. It's a great pleasure being here with all of you. And actually, a long time ago, I participated in FEMISE presenting some papers in Marseille. I remember one of the first meetings of FEMISE, but this was some time ago. But thank you so much for this invitation. It's very important what IEMed and FEMISE are doing. This is really very necessary to gather this very important group of experts to collect from the ground the research that is being done and providing with this not only data, information, knowledge, but also critical thinking about the economic dynamics in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is quite important for the OECD. It's an organization that you know. We have a very ambitious global relations strategy that we call is our way of trying to have an impact of global scale scale in the global economy. And the Mediterranean is quite specific because it's a combination of member countries of the OECD in the Northern Shore, Turkey, Israel, but also among the most advanced partners of the OECD are also in the Mediterranean through the MENA region, Egypt, Morocco with country programs, and the Southeast European countries through the Balkans program. So for us, it's also a very important laboratory to observe how emerging developing OECD economies are working together. But I will respond to the very good questions of Roger, if I can. I'm a bit challenged after talking about Massimo, because I very much share your views, your optimism, and I think this is very necessary to have this positive agenda. In fact, you have already responded in a way to my first question. Now the answer is yes, this is positive trends that exist. This is a tremendous potential that exists, but a lot of homework has to be done to achieve these results, and the news are not only always positive in how we are achieving progress to obtain these results. So in terms of what are the comparative advantages of the southern Mediterranean countries, it has been said that generally we underline the geographical location and the advantages of the trade that is happening in the Mediterranean as something that really provides important economic opportunities, especially through this way of functioning of the global economy and the better positioning in global value chains that can have for these countries important impact on industrial localization, diversification of the economy. It's true that during the pandemic crisis, there were very high expectations that multinational enterprises' decisions would reorganize geographically and sectorially the production of their activities through these concepts that we are using, nearshoring, friendly shoring, etc. And this is happening, but according to my colleagues in the Trade Directorate of the OECD, evidence is still to some extent episodic. We cannot say that this is a process that is confirmed, that spontaneously will bring this result, especially for these countries that we see they are still not attracting as much investment as they should, and still the trade integration is limited to a large extent because of the insufficient diversification of the economy. Still, it is important to work in that direction because the impact can be very positive in terms of deepening the process of industrial diversification, in terms of entering higher value segments of value chains, and therefore taking advantage and adapting to the digital economy, to the green economy, and then, of course, in doing what is most important for these countries, which is creating more and better quality jobs. On that, there is evidence, and in the OECD, we have, since a few years ago, an approach that we call FDI qualities, that is looking into the impact of the foreign direct investment in the recipient economies. And yes, it's true that FDI activities related to FDI, usually they create more quality jobs, more jobs for women, are usually more respectful of environmental considerations. There is a technological transfer that can also have spillovers in the local economy. And this is important because in the past we were perceived sometimes like foreign investment, the frameworks were just looking for the security of the foreign investor and not so much for the effect on the local economy. And yes, this is something that we have to work on that. Now, why homework is important? Because this is not happening naturally or spontaneously. At the end, this is the result of individual decisions of firms of the private sector that will go to places where they have good chances of obtain benefits and having an environment that creates for them a business case. And on that, our mantra is usually calling very much for a ambitious and advanced domestic reform agenda. It's important to work on the business and investment climate, creating the conditions for fair competition, leveling the playing field, improving the conditions of governance. So all these aspects of the business environment are very important. Trade frameworks are, of course, fundamental. In the case of the Mediterranean, we know, and our report with the UFM shows that even if there is some progress in the trade, still the overall trade agreements and frameworks are insufficient. For example, trading services is not covered in the agreements. It's important to advance in that direction. Trade facilitation, removing the barriers for trade between countries, so there is an important agenda there. Something very relevant for FEMISE is that in the new economy, digital, green, etc., is very important that the countries organize better systems between national and regional research and innovation networks that are very much linked more and more to the localization of industries and the provision of skills to the new activities. Take, for example, pharmaceutical. We have been working very much since COVID on the pharmaceutical sector. Tunisia, especially in Tunisia, a country that has very good pharmaceutical industry, very good potential, has the skills, the good regulations, etc. This can happen, but is really, you cannot live on the good results from the past. Is ongoing work in terms of moving the research agenda, the connection with the industries working on trade and thinking globally on that. I will not elaborate, it's already mentioned. Infrastructure development is essential, connectivity, etc. This is to say that, yes, these countries have very good potential. Now there is a very necessary reform agenda that will normally make a difference if we want to measure these results. Then let's not forget, if we are talking from a Mediterranean perspective or from a Euro-Mediterranean perspective, that, of course, geopolitics is changing, but also perceptions about the positioning in the world is changing. We have already mentioned the Gulf, for example, is not only another, southern neighbors of Europe are not looking into Europe only, not at all. Gulf is important, but Africa is fundamentally important and more. So even we are also working more and more with sub-Saharan Africa. Don't go there to talk about supply chains, because what does it mean, supply chains? And somebody from sub-Saharan Africa will tell you that we are suppliers of your commodities. What is supply chain? We want to work on regional value chains that are also conceived for our economic transformation and for our own industrialization, because there is a perception, not totally unfair, that in the past there has been a supply of commodities and then a massive import of basic needs of the countries, and the pharmaceuticals during the COVID is, of course, the best example. So very, I will follow your question. So this is one of the comparative advantage, but I will go to the second because I'm speaking very much. Of course, young population and the untapped potential of women is a second, let's say, comparative advantage and a potential that is regularly mentioned. And again, it's true. We know the figures. I will not insist on that. Young population, improvement of the educational standards in general, but especially for women. In some cases, and I always like to remind it, in general, MENA countries, some of them in particular, Egypt, the Gulf, when we are talking about access of women to science, technology, and mathematics, STEM skills, they are much better than the OECD average. There is a tradition in some countries of engineering studies, on technical studies. As a result, you have much more women trained in these scientific skills than in the average of the OECD countries. Now, as we know, this is not transformed into access to the labor market, where the level of unemployment and the level of economic activity for young and women are very low. And again, this is something that requires right policies to be put in place to really untap this potential that is absolutely necessary to transform the economies. There are many things here. Of course, it's about education, it's about skills that cannot come only from the national educational systems. These reforms take years and years to have an impact, but if we link investment and the role of the private sector in providing the skills, you can catch up much more quickly, and there are good examples of this in Asia, for example, that if you also engage the private sector in providing the skills for some investments, you can scale up the human capital more quickly than in other cases. But this also calls for the new role of the private sector. And on this, there is a transformation that comes from a long time, but also even the cultural patterns of employment should change. This is not only about public employment, that is the traditional preference in the country. In general, especially for women, but also for men, that is important to provide these opportunities to private sector to create the conditions for employment. Also related to COVID, there is something that is changing very much in the policy agenda, which is the role of informality and the impact of informality in the economy. We are talking in these countries, figures are sometimes contested, but around 60% of employment is informal. People talk about 25–30% of the GDP of the countries is estimated in being informal. COVID, in our view, has changed very much this agenda. So informality is not seen anymore as a buffer for social protection, more or less allow the people to have the necessary income, but it's becoming a problem because there is no social security schemes, there is no access to health, there is a tremendous vulnerability of the population and a big cost in terms of competitiveness. We are very happy with an initiative that we launched with the ILO and with the UNDP to favor the transition from informal to formal economy, and we think these initiatives can have impact. 2 words on integration, Roger, if you allow me. Yeah, I will really go to the finish because a lot has been said already about the integration and the report that Secretary General Kamal announced, and we are here with GIZ, who is very fundamental in the substantive and material support for this initiative. We are starting to work on the 2nd edition. This is not only about measurement, but integration there is also a political case for integration. So since the first edition of the report with the UFM, COVID, the aggression against Ukraine, we are not necessarily going in the direction of more integration. On the contrary, there is even contestation to integration. Many countries are becoming more protectionist. The electoral debates are becoming difficult in many countries on that. So it's important to build the case for integration with evidence, with data in the different aspects that we are going to consider in this report. And with this, I respond to the final question, Roger, on the role of international organizations. Of course, the international organizations are part of the international system with the idea of promote integration. This is tautological. This is what the international organizations are about. And it's fundamental that they really support, in my view, the collective interest beyond borders, beyond the individual national interest. But if we are talking about integration in the Mediterranean, it's important to shape the policy agenda to create the narratives that can go into that direction. I think migration, movement of people is a perfect example. We are in a policy issue that is shaped as a security issue, and every day we are looking into these tragedies, while there is a real case to look at this from a labor market supply through a skills provision needs, both in the north, in the south, and it is important that we provide the data and we contribute to shape this policy agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlos. And before moving to Katarzyna, I just retain a couple of ideas. One, which is it has an impact because nobody said it in such a way, and of course you are, your statement in that case is underpinned by data, the data that you will have to show later on in the review report. But what you said about the fact that we are moving towards greater disintegration, I believe that this is a statement that could be applied worldwide, but also equally in the region. So even the low degree of integration that the Secretary General was speaking about is being somehow hindered by the current landscape. So that's an important idea that we need to retain. And then the second thing is that you said, you didn't use this wording, but I also think that it has to be emphasized that things happen if conditions are created for things to happen. And you used the example of the pharma sector and the example of Tunisia. Of course, manna doesn't fall from heaven. Well, maybe in Algeria it has been falling for many decades, but in general, manna doesn't fall from heaven. So conditions mean reforms, and all what you spoke about have to be shaped. Otherwise, things will not happen, especially when thinking about reshoring and nearshoring strategies. Thank you very much. Let's now move to the final speaker, because before we go to dinner. Tonight we have prepared a very nice reception not far away from here. We would like to have a debate, so we need to finish the presentations and then engage in a debate, if possible, with you. And it is now my pleasure to give the floor to Katarzyna Zilo, who is the Director of the Middle East and North Africa Department at the Center for Social and Economic Research from Poland. So she's one of the very few specialized researchers that have worked for many, many years in the region and on the region from Poland, which of course, looking at the current situation, I have to give a value to that, right? Because everybody's looking eastwards, and somebody that for many years has been working from there southwards, it's something that has to be put into value. So, Katarzyna, the questions. How to ensure that geopolitical shift leads to cooperation rather than competition in the region, in the Mediterranean? And are current EU policies well calibrated to boost southern Mediterranean countries' economic development in a sustainable fashion? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. Thank you for the invitation. I have a very tough job because a lot of things were already said and mentioned. I also have a tough job because you ask us to be optimistic, and I am by nature not. I will do my best, though. And I will start with your first question about the global shifts and competition. Is it possible rather than competition in the Mediterranean? Oh, sorry. It's better now, yeah? You did stress I come from Poland, and I have this perspective from the East, and I will build on that in the beginning, because one of the global players we see in the Mediterranean is Russia, obviously. And the question is whether or not there's a room, there's a space for competition with Russia in the Mediterranean or elsewhere. The answer is no. From the perspective of a Polish person, I wouldn't say it's a no from the perspective of the EU. Many member states of the EU disagree with that no. It's old news that many countries in the southern Mediterranean disagree with that no. It was already mentioned, I think Brigitte mentioned that it came as a surprise to the EU, it came as a surprise to the US, that the countries in the South Med did not embark on unequivocally condemning Russian invasion. And Brigitte did mention we have a battle of narratives, but whether we do like it or not, the Russian presence in the region has not declined, right, since the invasion of Ukraine. Russia is there. I think it was just yesterday that Egypt announced that one of the blocks in this latest oil and gas exploration was awarded to Zarubezhneft, Russian, alongside BP, Qatar Energy, and Italy's Eni. We know that Turkey maintains a complicated but stable relationship with Russia, which does come useful when it comes to the grain deal. But then again, here I see more of a reluctant coexistence rather than competition with Russia. Now, China. I think it's been strangely absent from discussion today so far. It's been big news during the past conferences. I think the last conference we had, it was all about China. Everyone was talking about China. We don't talk about China that much anymore.
Why is that?
Why is that, right? So
Your answer.
the Belt and Road Initiative, it hasn't been delivering, right? Especially in the South Mediterranean. China is present in the Gulf more so than in some other countries. It's obviously present in Egypt, but in the Maghreb not so much. And I also believe the case is that, and I will tell why I believe that China, unlike Russia, has been to some extent slowly sidelined. And I'm talking now about the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. So during the G20 summit, the G20 did not condemn Russia officially, right? There was no official statement, we condemn Russia. But they did announce the creation of IEMed, of this corridor. And this is quite obviously a competition to the Chinese Belt and Road. So some countries that are to be part of IEMed are also part of Belt and Road for now. Italy, I've heard, is thinking about withdrawing from Belt and Road, right? But for now, Italy is part of it. Saudi Arabia, UAE, obviously are part of both Belt and Road and now IEMed. But I don't see any appetite for convergence between those two mega projects. Should there be convergence is another question. When you think about, for instance, environmental sustainability, I don't think there is. Infamously, Chinese projects are not exactly environment friendly, and quite explicitly, the IEMed is about sustainability. But again, and I think Alia mentioned this, the countries in the South Mediterranean are, and have to be opportunistic, right? To grab all the opportunities. So China maybe disappeared from our radar today. I don't think it's completely disappearing from the Southern Mediterranean. It was also mentioned, I did say it's a tough job because a lot of things I wanted to say were already mentioned, that there's perhaps some room to collaborate in energy. I think Massimo mentioned that. So EU is very keen to expand gas imports from the South Med to make itself less dependable on Russia. And some would argue that this is one of the factors that contributed to the maritime border agreement between Israel and Lebanon. But does it mean that there will be a peace deal between Israel and Lebanon? I doubt that. I highly doubt that. Now back to IEMed. It's an interesting project, but I'm always very skeptical of those big projects like Belt and Road. So much talk, so much pumping. The outcomes are very much mixed, to say the least. Now with IEMed, there's perhaps more potential. For the EU, I think there's a potential to prove that it can leverage its impact without very straightforward conditionality, which has been very much contested in the region, given the partners in the IEMed. I'm trying to think, and this is perhaps something we can discuss, because Turkey is excluded from IEMed. Is Turkey going to try to join, jump on the bandwagon? Is definitely not going to be happy to exclude it from such a big project. And this, I will leave it at that because I want to move towards to the second question that Roger asked me, and it's kind of related to IEMed. This is the cooperation in terms of trade and investment. And I'm actually very happy about Massimo's presentation because you answered some of the questions I had. Again, we've been talking a lot about China in the past. We've been talking a lot about nearshoring and reshoring since the COVID pandemic broke out. And I've been trying to find evidence like, has anything happened, Is it just another keyword that we've been using? Everyone is talking about this. You gave some examples, and I'm very happy about this, but is it really like the scale we've been expecting? Is this really scale that is enough to talk about proper reshoring, nearshoring, proper investment? I don't think so. I think those are great examples, but this is not enough, right? Especially if you can list them on fingers of the one hand, it means it's not enough. So that's one thing. missed opportunity window. Another thing when it comes to the EU policies and whether or not they were calibrated to boost the economic development in a sustainable fashion in the region. I think there's a lot of good things happening, a lot that deserves praise, but because we don't have a lot of time, I will focus on things that could be bettered. And one of them is planning and programming. So the current policies, the way they were developed, the discussion on how to develop it was not inclusive enough. The counterparts that were involved in the Southern Mediterranean, those that were mostly coming from the governmental circles. So a lot of people were not talked to, the local regional authorities, the LRAs, right, the CSOs, NGOs. Here's a little bit of a kind of mixed narrative surrounding that. The EU, the Commission will say, you know, we consulted a lot of people. People in the region will say, well, actually, no one asked us. I think going forward, this is really important to change the way that the EU is planning and programming its policies, to have really more leverage and to make them really more focused on sustainability for the future. One field in which this could be done is, for instance, corruption. So I talked about talking to CSOs, NGOs, and so forth. When you think about socioeconomic development in a sustainable way in the long term, corruption is one of the key factors that is preventing it. And this is also something that people in the region are noticing. So this is, if the EU really wants to progress more explicitly with, you know, like incorporating corruption into incentive-based approach and monitoring the levels of success, I think this is one of the fields where there's not going to be a pushback from the people from the region saying like, oh, you come and you impose your values. This is something that citizens of the region are actually wanting to see. Now, talking about sustainability in terms of supporting transition towards green energy in the South Med, there's a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of worry, right? Countries in the region are worried about repercussions from the European Green Deal for them. Companies are worried about potential repercussions going forward, and the EU itself is admitting that in the medium term, the deal could have adverse impacts on its neighbors. This is something to definitely bear in mind, that those are great goals in terms of transition toward green energy, but the price should not be paid by especially smaller businesses in the region. So what the EU could do is evaluate whether the funds that are assigned for climate-related actions are sufficient, and think perhaps about compensating the countries for some potential losses and disadvantages. My final point that I wanted to make is about, again, something that's been mentioned already, the environment to conduct business, and I will stop here. And this is really playing to everything we've been saying, to the shortening of the value chains, nearshoring, reshoring, developing, creating jobs. And I think we keep on talking about it, but I don't think the talk is honest enough when it comes to like talk between politicians or business to business. The investment, the proper investment on a bigger scale in the region can only happen if the environment to conduct business is improved. And here's a lot of misunderstandings. There's been, I've been involved in a study looking at the results of the free trade agreements, and there's been a lot of misunderstanding regarding what those free trade agreements should bring. Because the perspective in the South was that those agreements would bring investment to the region. For the EU, obviously, it was about trade, not investment. That's one thing. And second thing, very clearly, European companies are not Chinese companies. You can't tell them go and invest because you're state-owned, right? So without really big push towards change of better environment to conduct business, I don't think we're going to see much more examples of the nearshoring and reshoring, and we'll be left with the number of examples that will fit into one slide, sadly. I'll stop here, but I'm very happy to elaborate on some of the points. Thank you.
Excellent. So as you touch upon so many issues from IEMed to FTAs to repercussions of the European Green Deal, combat of corruption, EU policies, I will now let the audience to I will now let the audience basically to raise comments, questions to the panelists so that we can make most of the time that we have left. And I'm sure that many of you have many questions or many comments that you want to raise. So please introduce yourself and your country.
Okay. Good evening. Is it working? Yeah. My name is Karim Shaboni. I come from the Sfax School of Commerce in Tunisia. I have a question to Mr. Dean Reis. I don't know if it's possible to communicate directly. Is it possible that you go back to your slide 4? If it's possible. Just about the internationalization of the... Yeah, of the global chains. Yeah, this one. You said that we did the transition from the global value chains to the shortening value chains. I would say, I don't share totally your point of view. Maybe you mentioned the same, because we can say that we have both that coexist. You gave the example of the cars that are produced in Morocco. I think that mostly they are assembled in Morocco, because most of the parts of these cars, they come from everywhere in the world. And maybe many of them, they come from China. If you take an example of the batteries in the industry cars, they produce for the whole world, even for the United States. If you take the examples, for example, of the photovoltaic cellulars, then they are produced in China. So what is happening now is a question of comparative advantages. So the Chinese now, because they have a higher level of salaries, then they are not as competitive as 20 years ago. So these parts of production, maybe it went to other countries. So I think that shortening the value chain is not, I cannot say that it doesn't exist, but it exists. At the same time, at the global value chains, we will have the concomitant. So I don't agree that it's a real transition. Okay?
So we'll take, we'll collect a couple of additional questions there on the back. So if you can raise the micro on the back.
Hello everyone. So I'm Stéphane Poufari. I'm the CEO of Energy 2050, an NGO working since quite a long time on a systemic approach of development, and we run quite a number of projects, let's say worldwide, and especially in Africa. And I really appreciate the presentation, and especially the last one. We need to ask impolite questions when we speak about, let's say, integration and about exchange. We really need, for example, African countries now are finding so many resources. And when we discuss with these guys, they are going to sell. We can discuss about climate finance, about whatever we want, but we can discuss about Article 6, about blah, blah, but at the end, it will be the story. So we need to find a way to organize a fair discussion with these guys, incorporating corruption, the way we spend the money, everything, in a very transparent way. And there are many indicators on this issue, but nobody, and especially in the cooperation, and I'm working in this field, so, and I was part also in the national agency and UN system in my past activities, and we really need to discuss on that point, because otherwise we are just losing efforts, and especially now, because we have the global stocktake for the Paris Agreement, we have many, let's say, integrated reports, we are going to have KPIs and to be in position for the first time to monitor. So the suggestion as a recommendation, we need to have research on this issue to be in position to report the systemic, let's say, component of what we are speaking as integration. Because all the points you have presented, I will say, they will happen whatever we do. Why? For example, look at the hydrogen strategy for Morocco. It will be so huge. You go to Mauritania, you go to Namibia, they will do the job because they have also business model, it's work. And tomorrow, if they put a feed-in tariff, if they put something, it will just scale up in a clap. So now we are trying to push something, but we need to really put at the upfront of the agenda this kind of recommendation. And I really think this is a good momentum because there is a new geopolitics of energy. And frankly, we are going to lose the story. We can dream, we will be in position to discuss, but we are going. We have many, many projects on this issue, and I will just give you one new example. The least developing countries, they are finding Senegal, Guinea, and some other, they are finding huge amount of coal, gas, petrol. And now there's what we call the special reality for Africa. And these guys are concerned because they are going to lose the money dedicated to support through the climate agenda their development. And because of this resource, they are going to exploit. So we have a schizophrenic discussion with these guys, and now we really need to put everything because they complain about money, but money will not go to this direction just because international cooperation is not organized this direction. You know, so just to open the discussion, I really think it's very important, especially now, because of the new political agenda due to the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So it is critical, especially for Africa, and I will say for Mediterranean area also, just as a suggestion to discuss.
Okay, so let's take one more, and then we'll take a second round. So, Johannes. Should work.
Hello?
Yeah.
My name is Johannes Leppler. I'm the representative of GIZ, the German Development Cooperation Agency in Spain, and I'm heading a project to support the UFM here in Barcelona. We heard a lot of the opportunities about regional integration, the momentum, etc. But we also hear that it's not proactively being seized in most areas by the Mediterranean countries. So I wonder, do we not need a renewed political commitment by the Mediterranean countries to proactively push this process? Because we have the Barcelona process, which is 30 years old. And one of the goals of the Barcelona process was to have a Euro-Mediterranean free trade area by 2010, I believe. Now we are like 15 years almost after that deadline, and we have some countries that cannot even trade freely bilaterally, like neighboring countries. So in terms of sharing and renewing that vision and the political commitment and establishing an overarching agenda, do we not need a renewal of that some sort to check in to see if we even share that vision still? Is there a joint vision? I mean, the Mediterranean countries vote very differently when it comes to UN resolution on Russia, right? And so even on a global level, there's divergence. And regionally, there's a lot of divergence. There's a lot of disintegration when we look at Agadir, when we look at Union Maghreb Arab. So do we not need a renewed political process, and which could be the right way to do that is my question.
Thank you, Johannes. So I'm going to give the floor, before we move into a second round, to Carlos, because Carlos will have to leave us because he has a plane to catch, and then we take the rest of the panelists. So, Carlos.
I appreciate, and I take the chance of responding directly to Johannes, because I think it's a very pertinent and important question. I think there are probably two dimensions on that. One is the diplomatic political dimension, and it's obvious that when we are talking about the Mediterranean southern countries, the situations are so heterogeneous that without naming every country, there are countries that are very engaged in a very advanced reform agenda for macroeconomic, for political reasons, whatever. There are countries that are experiencing big difficulties to reform their countries in conflict. So it's very complicated from that perspective, and it's difficult, therefore, to probably engage at that level. Now, we need to be attentive of the evolution and the internal dynamics of these countries. And when I was referring before to the demographical dimension, the youth, the new role of women, the educational levels, the role of social media, we see societies that are moving very fast and very often are going even beyond and faster than the governments. But also let's look into the private sector. Again, there are also plenty of good experiences of startups, of social economy, of innovative firms working on digital, on green elements, very often young people. I think it's very important to provide also opportunities and to incorporate these new forces into the game and into the dialogue. And this is being done. So the organizations, the UFM, the European Union, many are more and more and more not only interacting with governments, of course, are fundamental, and they have the legitimacy, obviously, to decide on behalf of the countries. But countries are much more complex than that. So I really would encourage, when we are talking about GVCs, for example, or about the investment, or about trade, we cannot have this conversation only with the policymakers or with the public officials. And we see, for example, in our work in the Middle East and North Africa, we work very much with the private sector. And there is a very interesting emergence of business associations, of groups of people that are committed and are integrating new forms of policy advocacy. So I think the last years, before the Arab Spring, but also because of the Arab Spring, whatever political evolution the Arab Spring took, there is something that will never change back, in the sense that these are societies that are complex, that are active, where you have a lot of interlocutors that can play a very important role on that. This would be my answer to that.
Thank you, Carlos. Yeah. So, Massimo, perhaps, yeah?
So, reshoring and shortening on value chain, it was in a certain way also your point. I mean, I'm talking of a process, something that we have to look from a dynamic perspective, okay? From what we see as a bank for the Italian companies, there is a strong process of reshoring, not in Italy, but close by, especially in the Adriatic Balkans countries, so close on that side, because we normally think about that the Mediterranean is only the south, but from an Italian perspective, the Mediterranean is also the Adriatic Sea, and we see reshoring in this side. We see reshoring in some countries. I agree, not all countries are the same. We see reshoring in Turkey, for example, in the textile sector, very clearly. So, it's, I think we are at the beginning of a wave. From my view, the wave will come, and will come for some fact. There are some logistics problems right now to act as a global company in comparison to 3-4 years ago. It's more costly. It's not sure your goods arrive in time. There are problems in the cost of logistics. There are congestions in some ports. There are political tensions that were not the case 5 years ago, especially if you deal with Asia. When I'm talking about reshoring, I'm especially talking about reshoring from Asia to close by. So when I put the point is because I want to underline that there is an opportunity, because this process is coming to see. We see from the perspective of a bank acting in a country which is a big manufacturing country. So I think that this is, together with the other points, of course, not alone, together with the other points, when I put the evidence on the shortening of routes, this is statistics. It's very clear. Lower container ship from China to Europe, more short sea. This is something related to the fact that there are more trade at the regional level instead of global trade from all the areas. So if we look in this perspective and in these dynamics, I think we can say that these three facts all together, not one alone to the other, let us to say that the Mediterranean has a great opportunity to attract. And the final point, if you look, is not by case that some countries are investing so much in free zones. the Egyptians' Suez Canal free zone, they are pushing a lot on the free zone in order to attract new investment. And the success of TangerMed is not only for the positioning in the Mediterranean, but is also because they have a free zone. So free zones together in some key ports, together with the logistic, infrastructures in order to attract. So I think this is a view which is not only to be optimistic because we want to be optimistic, but because we see this process. I can agree that we are at the beginning, and I can say I hope it's the beginning, but we see clear sign. And if I may, one last point, because you mentioned what I call the Cotton Road, but I mean it's simply a different way to call the same. I think this can be very important for the Mediterranean if it will be implemented. Because for two reasons. The first reason is in competition, and this is for sure with the Belt and Road Initiative. But competition to what? Competition to enter into the Mediterranean. Because also the Belt and Road Initiative, if you look maps of the Belt and Road Initiative from the China official government, the final point, arrival point was Venice, was Marseille, was to enter into the European markets from their perspective. So competition. And the second point is a remark that is the cotton road don't pass through the Suez Canal. So it's, a new road to enter into the Mediterranean without passing through the Suez Canal. And this is very important for the Mediterranean because it's another option. It gives another option to enter into the Mediterranean without passing through the Suez Canal. And by the way, if you look another perspective, which is the submarine cables, 99% of the submarine cables that connect everything we can do with the internet, not only for joking or for our free time, but also for business, especially for business, are submarine, okay? 30% of the world submarine are in the Mediterranean, but 30% it's 1/3, but it's nothing if we don't say that it's crucial for the connection between Asia and United States. The large majority of these submarine cables pass through the Suez Canal, under the Suez Canal. Now the new project of Europe to establish new cables with India, with China, don't pass through the Suez Canal, but pass through Israel and Saudi Arabia. With the same perspective, to find alternatives, because you never know. And we have seen 2 years ago with the Ever Given in the middle of the Suez Canal, a complete block in the supply chain. And the same can be for submarines. So this is something just to say that when others look for alternatives to reach your theater, that means that your theaters, in a certain way, it's important.
Who else would like to, if you have to add new things, or otherwise we move to the next one?
I just want to reiterate the point on the political, yes, on the need to re-engage politically about what is the new, basically, a value proposition of the reintegration in a post-Ukraine war world. I think given exactly these divisions that we have seen on the geopolitical choices, but also the fact that today the Mediterranean is, in the southern Mediterranean, is even in much dire economic situation, actually they are seeing Europe sort of not re-engage, but rather drift away. So that makes it even more imperative to rekindle a new messaging, a new value proposition, taking into consideration all these issues of interconnectivity in both in energy and transport, and the way to put back the Mediterranean at the center, but that the center can only be through cooperation with Europe. And I think absolutely it is needed. And that has to come both from, not only from the EU, but you really need also a momentum in the South Mediterranean that we have to agree today is very weak, right?
Yes, one point on something that Johanna said as well about trade even between countries in the South Mediterranean is not possible. In general, it's a very important point because without cooperation between the Arab countries, the overall power of the region, negotiating power with anyone, with the EU, with China, with anyone, is very low. Arab countries are joining BRICS, right? African Union is joining the G20, G21. Where is the Arab League, right, in this? So this is definitely something to bear in mind. Trade with the EU, trade with everyone else, great, but trade within the South Med region is absolutely crucial to remember about that as well.
Okay, so we have a second and last round of questions. I had Patrick, and then you, and then who else was there? Otherwise, we limit it to Patrick and my good friend, Tobias.
Let me begin by saying thank you to all the participants. The presentations were very, very interesting. And my question will be to Massimo De Andreis. I fully buy your storyline. I think that there is very good opportunities for Southern Mediterranean countries with respect to US-China decoupling and Russia-Ukraine conflict. I think that one of these elements are, of course, the demography in European countries and also the migration constraints that we face. And, of course, reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring provide opportunities for these countries. But there is a minor point with respect to the catch-up process that you have presented between Maghreb ports, harbors, ports, and the most efficient North European countries. Yes, yes. I would say that it's quite easy to share your point of view. I suppose that you use UNCTAD figures. With UNCTAD figures, I can share your point of view. But if you look at LPI, for example, of the World Bank, then you will see that the difference, for example, for the port of Tunis is far to be as good as UNCTAD statistics present this port. So I'm okay with IEMed. And when you use the automotive sector, I think this is one of the best you can use. This is true that IEMed is very efficient for exporting cars, but I would be more cautious with respect to Algerian ports and Tunisian ports with respect to this big difference that we have in the statistics as regard of the efficiency of these ports.
Please be concise in your comment, because we have.
Alfred Tobias from Hebrew University, Israel. My thinking is a little different to what has been said here. Insofar, I think the starting point is that integration, economic integration among southern Mediterranean countries, although politically significant, and maybe in your direction, making more of a weight in the international scene, economically doesn't make much sense. If Southern European Mediterraneans are not in the group. Now, it would make sense, for example, to have, I don't know, a cooperation agreement, a strong, deep cooperation agreement, integration agreement between Greece, Spain, Israel, Egypt, etc., etc. But the reality is that Southern Europe has made her choice. historical choice, which is the good one, not the wrong one. Don't take me badly. That is, they are members of the European Union. My point is to say that there is a limit to the amount of cooperation and integration that Greece and Cyprus, for example, can make with Israel or Egypt, and we see it in the gas forum, without taking into consideration what Brussels has to say. That is, the shots are being called by Mrs. van der Leyen, not by the Prime Minister of Greece. And that leads me to the next conclusion, that if that is so, the historical decision has been taken by Southern Europe to join the Northern Europeans, which makes sense, like Eastern Europe countries did the same. Okay? So the next thing is to say the best thing for the Mediterraneans would be to incorporate the internal market. Okay? But, and here comes the but, it's not that I am giving you a solution. The but is that there is no doubt in my mind that Europe is ambivalent and ambiguous about its will to integrate Mediterranean non-member countries into the internal market. For me, this is absolutely clear. The reasons are multiple. For the same reason that it fears to integrate Turkey in the internal market fully. Now, you gave the example, but it's a mini example of the Western Balkans. And, okay, incorporating Albania, okay, in the internal market might be a problem, but the size of Albania is acceptable. So when you speak about reshoring, my impression is that there is some ambivalence also towards reshoring, because everything goes together. The liberty of movement of goods goes many things hand in hand in the liberty of movement of people. So in the back of the mind of many Europeans, let me finish with this, I don't want to, the back of the mind, this ambivalence regarding the southern shore of the Mediterranean, the ambivalence comes from the fear that the liberty of movement of goods, which reshoring means, would bring along movement of people. And that's what they don't want. We are seeing it in the migration thing. I am not going to sermonize you, because in Israel there is the same problem in long term. Okay? The differences in income per capita between the two shores of the Mediterranean or between Israel and its neighbor is such a dimension that any proposition of liberty of movement of goods and services leads inevitably to movement of people. And that's what, in my opinion, is what makes explains this ambivalence of Europe towards the non-member countries.
Thank you, Ahmed. So I'll give the floor to the three of you for 1 minute, and then we'll conclude. Okay. Are you able to answer in 1 minute? You want to start? Please.
I mean, I don't want to answer. I just want to go back to my initial point, is that as much as it is important to think about prospects of convergence, because you are talking about convergence, right? Income convergence and what drives trade, etc. I think for me, as an economist looking immediately at these countries, the bottleneck immediately is macro stability today, because, and particularly in the southern Mediterranean. In Egypt, in Tunisia, in Jordan, Lebanon already is in dire conditions. And I think as much as we could see potential for cooperation and integration without solving the immediate binding constraint that is the macro picture today, and that requires a different kind of approach, both from the EU, the way it cooperates bilaterally with the GCC, with the international institution. I think those dreams of integration and cooperation will be very slow. So that's why I'm trying to bring back to this binding immediate constraint that we need to address.
I don't think you're incorrect, but we have research that shows that in the beginning, as GDP goes up, people do emigrate, but until a certain threshold. Then they don't, right? And the goal of opening trade in goods and services is to increase the socioeconomic welfare in the countries in the south. In the long term, the goal is that the situation in those countries is good enough for people not having to have the movement. So I agree what you're thinking, but this is like the short-term thinking, right? In the short term, people might move. In the long term, that would not happen. Whether or not this is a good thing or not is a completely separate question. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you. For the liner shipping connectivity index, well, it's an average, of course. It's an average. I agree that not all ports are the same. Under this performance, you have especially Tanger Med and Port Said, but Tunisian ports are not at the same level. But the trend, the point is to look at the trend, and the trend is clear. Also, for example, in the market share of containers, the market share of containers for the Mediterranean port is growing, also in comparison with the North European ports. And this is not only because Mediterranean ports are doing well, but also because northern ports have problems. All northern ports are river ports, so they have problems. So it's a balance, but there is a clear trend that the South Mediterranean ports are growing in a certain way, with big differences. So what I wanted to highlight is that the trend is positive. So this is something that we have to take into account. I agree EU is ambiguous. I agree we are in the middle of a lot of ambiguity because there is the European Union policies, there is the national country policies, there is the international framework, and there is also the business. And I think that when, for example, in our cases, we decided some years ago to invest, entering the Egyptian market, buying an Egyptian bank, and it is not a small bank. We have 6,000 people working there, 170 different branches all over the country, is because we think that there are opportunities. And if we look at the bank, they are doing very, very well, a good satisfaction from the budget point of view from our bank. So this is, I think, we should look from, a large perspective from the we are a mix, different, framework, so someone look more on the political side, on the international relations side. I look from the business side, and I see a lot of business that is moving between the two sides of the Mediterranean. It is enough? No. I agree, it's not enough, but there is.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's time to conclude, and I'm sure you will agree with me that the debate had a great and high quality. So I would like to thank all the speakers, those that stayed until the very end, and those that had to leave. It would be pretentious from my side to try to summarize because we touch upon so many vast and different issues, but of course the way how they presented the issues, the angles, and also your questions that enriched the debate were of great help, I think, for the annual conference and as first plenary debate. Now, before we applaud, because once we applaud we will stand up, let me remind you that we have scheduled the dinner for tonight at 8:30. So actually in 1 hour and 35 minutes, the regional minister is coming, so you better be there on time. And that is at the it's an impressive, magnificent building, which is located like 20 minutes walking from here. But I think you're leaving from the hotel. And it is the Maritime Museum of Barcelona, building from the, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. President, from the 14th century, Gothic style. So be there on time, and of course, I think that the group will be taken together. On the way back, there is a bus from the museum to your hotels. But on the way there, due to the public works that we have been experiencing during the last 2 years in the city of Barcelona, it's better to walk than to take the bus. So thank you very much. And now, yes, please join me in applauding the speaker. Yeah.
you.